Our first panel today will discuss the first of the Citizens Party's two headline policies. Australia needs an independent foreign policy. Our first speaker, John Lander, is eminently qualified to talk on this subject. John is a veteran Australian diplomat with 30 years' experience in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. He was Deputy Ambassador to the People's Republic of China in 1974 to 76 and the first Ambassador to the Islamic Republic of Iran in 1985 to 1988. John headed up the China desk at DFAT 3 times, where he played a central role in building Australia's relationship with China. He represented Australia at UNESCO, where he served directly under Gough Whitlam and has many funny stories about his experience. Please welcome John Lander.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'll leap straight in because we haven't much time. Back in July 1971, when I was working in the Department of Foreign Affairs, preparing for the recognition of the People's Republic of China, we wrote a policy planning paper which said, and I quote, "The American alliance in a shifting power balance means less to us than it has in the past. Accordingly, we shall need, now more than ever, to formulate independent policies based on Australia's national interests and those of our near neighbours." It was true then. It's even more true now. But Australia has done exactly the opposite. It has elevated the alliance to such sacrosanct status, which brooks no challenge, that we are losing control of our own destiny. Albanese and Miles assert that the American militarisation of Australia protects Australia's sovereignty. This is just so much flim-flam designed to flummox the masses. It's done exactly the opposite. It so undermines Australian sovereignty that Australia has no independent agency on any matter of existential consequence. This is true for all sectors, economic, political, legal, financial and media, but it is nowhere more true than in the defence and military sector. The Force Posture Agreement, which affords the USA unimpeded access to and exclusive use of all Australian bases in which it chooses to locate its military assets, makes it clear that Australia has no say in how, when, where and against whom such assets will be used. It doesn't make Australia safer. America has always made it clear that it's not designed to. As stated by the leader of the recent US congressional delegation to Darwin, Northern Australia is the epicentre of the projection of United States power in the Indo-Pacific. Think about the consequence. Australia is the epicentre of any retaliation against that projection of power. For example, Australia's support of the United States' efforts to weaken Russia in Ukraine has led Australia being on a list of 47 countries regarded as of danger to Russia. So we are now exposed to a potential strike from Russia, a nuclear superpower. Defence Minister Miles boasts that the extended range and lethality of Australia's military capability, enhanced by the complete interchangeability of Australian and US armed forces, will enable Australia to strike potential adversaries further from our own shores. This surely could only be perceived by the countries of our region as increasing the level of threat against them. Perhaps this is why we see Indonesia engaging in joint operations with the Russian Navy in Indonesian waters. We cannot be secure in our own region when we increase the offensive capability against our neighbours. Friendship and mutually beneficial cooperation is the best guarantee of security. The United States has made it clear that China is enemy number one, and Australia has dutifully joined in adopting a hostile attitude towards China, our principal trading partner. So we now have the schizophrenic policy of pleading with China to buy ever more of our exports so that we can earn enough money to pay for the armaments from America that we will use in a war against China. I can't think of anything more crazy. They must think that we think that they are stupid. If we continue to insist that China is a threat, we will end up forcing China to treat Australia as a threat. It has always been adamant that it does not wish to do so. First and foremost, the military-industrial complex, before it starts manufacturing all its weapons, has to manufacture a threat, a fictional threat, to convince government to purchase the ever more expensive armaments to meet it. It has been remarkably successful in convincing our political duopoly of the fantasy of the China threat, and in persuading them to throw billions of dollars into purchasing the products of death and destruction. Recent poll results show that the majority of the Australian people want Australia to refuse to go to war against China. This suggests that the people are not similarly so convinced. The United States has also made it clear that it will not engage in a war against a nuclear-armed adversary. It will instead engage in war by proxy, as they are currently doing in Ukraine. It has strung together a network of proxies from Japan to Australia to be used in war against China in the near future. So it cannot be repeated often enough. I've said it before, I will say it again and again. America is not preparing to go to war against China. It is preparing Australia to go to war against China. We don't seem to appreciate the gravity of the danger that we have been manoeuvred into. Our government says that the sacred alliance with America is based on our shared values and democracy. Have a look at the values that Australia shares. Illegal sanctions, illegal invasions like Iraq and Afghanistan, bombing campaigns, Libya, Serbia, Yemen, overthrowing democratically elected governments. Ukraine is a very good example. Supporting dictatorships like Saudi Arabia, massive armament spending, 900 military bases in foreign countries, illegal occupation of foreign territory, increasingly rampant wealth disparity, environmental degradation, debt traps for developing countries through IMF and World Bank loans with coercive political strings attached, illegal appropriation, that's theft, of other countries' sovereign assets, inadequate and deteriorating infrastructure, declining educational standards, unaffordable healthcare, a drug epidemic, an epidemic of gun deaths across the domestic civilian population, authoritarian domestic security measures, increasing restrictions on freedom of speech. Although President-elect Trump has surprisingly vowed to restore unfettered freedom of speech as the guardian guarantee of democracy. We shall wait and see. Because of the alliance, Australia insists that it must uphold the international rules-based order. That is not international law. as evolved through the United Nations and its various bodies. It is a set of largely arbitrary rules designed by the US to keep its position as top dog in the world. In other words, the United States makes the rules and we follow the orders. The United States actually flouts most international laws and rules. Just look at what USA refuses to sign and ratify. The Rome Statute of the International Court, repudiating the jurisdiction of both the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. The Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, most of the conventions of the International Labour Organization, the Convention on the Protection of the Rights of Migrant Workers, the United Nations Genocide Convention. The US claims that it is exempt. The UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, China is a party. Agreement on Prevention of an Arms Race in Outer Space, Anti-Personnel Landmine Convention, the International Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Quite a list. The US withdrew from the Paris Climate Change Accord. The USA has blocked appointments to the Appellate Board of the World Trade Organization, thus neutering its capacity to enforce internationally agreed rules of trade. The United States of America violates the Geneva Convention on the Laws of War, the Chemical Weapons Convention, the Biological Weapons Convention, the Convention on the Prohibition of Torture. The USA has withdrawn from most arms limitation agreements, most significantly those relating to the control of nuclear weapons. The USA has placed illegal economic and financial sanctions on at least 37 countries, not only Russia, but some of the world's poorest developing countries, Cuba, Iran, Afghanistan, Palestine, Venezuela, etc., etc. The United States has violated or ignored the many treaties it had entered into with its own Indigenous peoples. The USA applies its laws to the rest of the world and then hypocritically holds other countries accountable to international laws that it refuses to sign. The current slaughter that the US is fueling in Israel-Palestine, it is important to note that the US considers that neither the Genocide Convention nor the jurisdiction of the international courts apply to it. Australia joins in with America in flouting international law whenever it suits the United States for us to do so. We did it in Iraq when we joined the coalition of the willing, better described as the coalition of the killing, in the destruction of Iraq, resulting in the deaths of at least 1 million people. We did it to similar effect for 20 years in Afghanistan. We are doing it now in supporting Israel's slaughter of the Palestinians, in breach of the Genocide Convention, which obliges us to take all possible action to prevent a potential genocide, which has been determined by the International Court of Justice to exist. Our participation in the bombing of Yemen contravenes the Geneva Convention on the Laws of War, which prohibits attacks on the territory of another country unless that country poses a direct threat to our own territory. In our own region, although we claim to adhere to the legal position that Taiwan is an integral part of China's sovereign territory, we join in so-called freedom of navigation operations in the Taiwan Straits. This is an incursion into China's territory in contravention of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which expressly prohibits military operations in another country's territorial waters or exclusive economic zone. China's reactions have mercifully been non-violent so far, despite the mainstream media propaganda machine's distortion of them as acts of aggression. Australia's constant flouting of international law disqualifies us from recourse to international law for the protection of our interests. This further weakens Australia's security. The key phrase in the 1971 policy paper that I referred to earlier is "in a shifting power balance." Leadership on both sides of politics in Australia seems to have neither the wit to understand the nature of the changes that are taking place in the world, nor the courage to devise policies to take advantage of them. Instead, we have doubled down on trying to hold back the tide, which, as King Canute proved, is an impossible task. The emergence of the BRICS Plus Economic Forum clearly shows that the tide is moving to the east and to the global south. The BRICS Plus share of global GDP now exceeds that of the G7, the Genocide 7 countries. The success of the Kazan summit of BRICS Plus, with the attendance of some 20,000 delegates from Africa, Asia and Latin America, including 34 heads of state and government, clearly demonstrates where the global majority now sits. The BRICS New Development Bank provides for the creation of infrastructure and economic growth in developing countries. The creation of a financial clearance centre enables BRICS Plus participating countries to trade with each other in their own currencies without the use of the almighty dollar. New metals and grains exchanges being set up by BRICS will give producing countries and participating countries more control over the marketing of their own resources. China's economic strength sits at the heart of all these developments. It also continues to forge ahead with its own Belt and Road initiative for infrastructure projects across Central Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Africa and Latin America. At least 160 countries have signed up for this. Even Australia did so until it was forced to withdraw by the United States. Our near neighbours, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, are cooperating partners with BRICS, and they all have also infrastructure projects under China's BRI. By means of the BRI, China will bypass the maritime choke points that have enabled the United States to exert global control. China's growing economic power and influence undermines United States supremacy. And that is why the United States wants war to stifle China. But US supremacy is already over, as shown by the failure to weaken Russia in Ukraine. The United States is in denial. It's unable to recognise the new reality. The benefits of aligning ourselves with China and participating in the growth in our region are obvious. But Australia is caught between a rock and a hard place. If we go to war against China, we will suffer devastation. If we refuse to go to war against China, America will punish us. United States control of our economy, finances, and especially our digital communications systems, essential for the conduct of business, means it could shut us down. Like it did in a limited way, cutting us off from international finance when Gough Whitlam threatened to close Pine Gap. Ominously, declassified communications between Washington and Marshall Green, then the US ambassador to Australia, reveal that the United States was in fact planning military action to keep Pine Gap open if Whitlam were re-elected. Australia has to make a bold, hard-headed and rational cost-benefit analysis of two highly unpalatable choices. To do so, we must first regain sovereign financial control so that we can fund the development of sovereign economic control and sovereign military control. The creation of a bank owned by the government on behalf of the people and out of the hands of the private banks is the essential first step. We cannot afford to flip-flop electorally between the two sides of the political duopoly, or, as has been said, the two cheeks of the same backside. In the vain hope that one side or the other will bring about real change. A vote for either of the major parties at the next election must be rejected in favour of building a third force within the Parliament that will effectively advance and achieve policies of benefit to the people, instead of benefit to vested financial, political and military interests which are opposed to the welfare of the people. At the next election, the power of the people must be shown to be greater than the people in power.
Thank you, John.